Good morning and welcome to Cheche, the show where opinion counts, live on Citizen TV. I'm your host, Udwa Kamimo. Today's show focuses on Uganda because the country's elections are at the center of regional attention. Today is the final day of campaigning. Polls open tomorrow. Tanzania pulled off a peaceful election last year, but the run-up to the vote in Uganda has been marred by violence. The detention of an opposition leader 3 days before the poll. Kenya is next on the election calendar, but already has a long record of electoral violence. So what lessons can we learn from elections in the region? Well, today's guests, we should have one guest who's stuck in traffic. We'll introduce him when he comes in. But we have with us for the moment Richard Onyonka. He's the ODM Member of Parliament for Kitutu Cheche South. He's a member of the Defense and Foreign Relations Committee in the National Assembly and a former Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs. As always, we have the panel of Mutegi Njau and David Makali. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for making it on time. Now, your committee, the Defense and Foreign Relations Committee,
yes,
has sent a delegation to Uganda for observation.
Yes.
What sort of information, what sort of observations are they sending back to you?
Well, of course, there are about 3 things that we look at when you go to do make an observation on elections. Number 1 is to find out whether the elections preparations are being done well. In terms of whether the opposition, the ruling party and all the other stakeholders are reasonably satisfied with the preparations arrangements with their electoral bodies. The second issue is that you then go in to find out what the public feeling is, whether the public feels confident enough, secure enough to go and vote when the day comes. And finally, what we do is we look at the basic standards. In other words, what do you call a free and fair election? As a member of Parliament or as member of the Foreign Relations Committee, we are given parameters that we have to tick on.
Are you a part of a larger observation mission?
Yes, usually there is the East African Parliament, other than IALA, East African parliamentarians, like in Uganda, you're going to have observers coming from Tanzania, some will come from Rwanda, Burundi, of course, will send some. So there is a caucus, which parliaments within the region send, so that in case the election is either viewed not to be free and fair, or in case there is any observation that may be positive or negative, then we can either affirm it or reject it. What's
the point of rejection? Because in our experience, and I think David and Mutegi will bear me out, most observation missions serve the purpose of rubber stamping elections, whether they are free and fair or not.
Unfortunately, you're right, but there are cases where elections have been held and observer missions have in fact given a negative legitimacy, or others have actually said even when this election was flawed and mad, it had violence and all that, on a reasonable basis. They will use terms like that. On a reasonable basis, the election either looked free or the election looked like it fulfilled the expectations of the public of that particular country. I may not remember the country, 1 or 2 countries specifically, where actually observer missions have come out and said the election was not free and fair. And normally,
I think in the case of Burundi, there was no possibility the elections would have been free and fair.
That is true. Essentially, Burundi is actually an exception because the feeling in Burundi and the feeling within the region is that Nkurunziza should have left office. But the scenario you have in Burundi now is when you talk to them, they tell you, but Museveni is running for his 5th term. They tell you Kagame is in the process of changing the constitution. They will use all sorts of arguments, but my honest observation is that the general feeling of the public in all these countries where elections take place, will always tell you the truth about what they think and what they feel at that particular moment.
Hence the parameter of public expectation.
Yes, yes.
And which would be germane to that country.
Yes.
Kenya plays the role of big brother,
yes,
within the East African region. So what concerns, if any, do you have about Uganda's election?
The concerns about Uganda's elections, number one, there seems to be a role of violence in Uganda's election. Not that in Kenya we don't have that violence, of course. If you remember 2007 and 2008, I think ours went to the extreme level. The problem you have in Uganda is that there seems to be this general feeling that Museveni is just a bully, that there isn't any likelihood that the elections in fact will be fair and fair, that Besigye seems to be the opposition leader in Uganda, seems to be overly exposed to the machinations and state humiliation by the Ugandan government. The other issue that is there is from a distance, many of the Ugandans, when you talk to them, both the general public and the politicians and the intelligentsia, will tell you that the fear they have most is that in case Besigye defeats Museveni, there's a likelihood he may not hand over power to Museveni may not hand over power to Besigye, which is very sad.
But Museveni declared when they had a debate the other day, that in case he loses, he will hand over. But he, staying there, that he knows that no party which can fit his party.
Saying it does not mean he will effect it. I think as a PR exercise, he did very well in that interview, and he actually made Ugandans realize that he may hand over power. What we feel, those people who have been making observations on Ugandan elections, is that the only way Museveni is going to hand over power is that if he loses, the margin has to be so big that it will be impossible for him to make any argument, legal or otherwise, for him not to hand over power. But the situation, the way it is now, the race is actually very close. Museveni has the instruments of power. He controls the IEBC, the Ugandan body that is running the elections, because he's the one who appoints all the commissioners. In Kenya we're a bit lucky because there could be a possibility you can even vet them, but in Uganda it's the president who selects them. In Uganda it is the president who picks who is going to be the head of the Supreme Court, head of the High Court, and in case it goes that way. So there are issues and questions that are raised about the independence and the freeness of the Ugandan elections. Let me call on the expertise of the panelists, David and Mutegi. What other parallels do you see between Kenya and Uganda? Our guest has just laid out a couple, and the most glaring one is this distrust of the Electoral Commission, which I think is reflected in Kenya, and the independence of the judiciary, which we're beginning to hear the rumblings in Kenya as well. Do you see any other parallels?
I think it's behaving like Kanu Times, where you zone off areas so that the opposition cannot go there. It is where, particularly urban areas, the Besigye and the others, they are being banned to go to Kampala, and you can see the violence yesterday and Monday. It's like zoning areas, because urban people, when they vote, they are more liberal than the rural areas.
Favor the opposition.
So that is one comment, that Kanu type of thing. It's very sad.
I agree with Mutegi. The propensity for deployment of the state machinery against the opposition in Uganda is obvious. I mean, Museveni allows you to do your thing, but there's always this rungu hanging on top that if you exceed certain limits or you become a problem, we'll devise mechanisms to contain you. And I think he's done that over the last so many years, every election. Again, the political landscape of Uganda is pretty much like Kenya's. The urban areas, sensitized, restless, restive mobs in Kampala, in the other major towns, are pro-opposition almost. And so he has to quell that. But in the countryside, he still as Mutegi says, reflective of KANU, in 1992 or thereabouts, where there was agitation in the urban areas, opposition support, but in the upcountry, the machinery of NRM is much like the machinery that KANU had here, and what in Tanzania CCM has continued to hold on to, and so that confers Museveni a certain advantage in any electoral race. And I see this is likely just to turn out in the same past pattern.
But there's one positive thing about Uganda's election this time.
Yes.
The debate that took place.
Yes.
That Museveni subjected himself to sit with those people.
Yes.
And he beat them hands down.
Yes.
I don't like the way the journalists conducted it.
Yeah.
I think they look like they were intimidated also. And the fact that Museveni agreed. You remember back when he was running, he had to appear for a debate, because he didn't think he was worth debating with those kind of people. But I think it is positive that they agreed to do. It's an example that next time there will be maybe a better debate.
But what about the same faces? Because it's the same characters contesting the Ugandan poll. President Museveni, opposition leader Kizza Besigye. This is his fourth attempt at the presidency. Amama Mbabazi has been around for a while. And all these people who've been within the system. Is that reflective of Kenya at all?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, in Kenya, in fact, you would think it's just a mirror of what had happened before. The truth is, Kalonzo Musyoka was Kibaki's vice president. Wetangula was the Minister of Foreign Affairs with President Kibaki. Now you have the flip side of that has happened is that Kalonzo is now with CORD leader Raila Odinga, and Moses Wetangula has crossed over. All right. The truth is, the same players come in because of various and different disagreements which take place, political or otherwise, for the simple reason that politics is all about certain interests. In Uganda, Mbabazi is coming in. Initially was received with a lot of hoopla and a lot of excitement in terms of people assuming that he might bring in something different. But as the exercise continued, he just ended up looking like he's another pro-establishment, pro-Museveni individual who may have been disgruntled. But again, many people feel that Mbabazi is actually a candidate in preparation for the takeover in case Museveni wins this election, and after 5 years
he becomes the heir.
He becomes the heir apparent to the exercise, and most probably with Museveni's son Muhoozi coming in as Mbabazi's vice president, where then the future in Uganda will be sorted out.
So it's not an election about tomorrow, but an election about 5 years to come.
It's an election about what happens even if Museveni wins now, what happens after he wins. And many Ugandans are extremely, some are very, very worried about the possibility that Museveni has refused to allow them to move on. Many Ugandans feel that he's holding them back because they look at Tanzania. We've had 5 presidents when Museveni has been there, and yet Tanzania has moved on, and the Tanzanians have actually accepted the democracy. Look at Kenya. Museveni has been there from the days of President Moi. President Kibaki came in, he left with the coalition government, then you follow with President Uhuru coming in. So the Ugandans feel like they're stuck in the middle, and many of them would wish that Museveni would be a statesman and they would just hand over power to the public, to the Ugandan people, and somebody else can come in.
But this is his last term also, I guess.
We assume it's his last
term. The assumption is that he's running for the last time, and in another 5 years, I think his son Muhoozi will be in the position to take up the mantle.
Yes.
I don't.
But
think
this is the point that Mr. Onyonka is making.
Yeah.
That Mr. Mbabazi is seen as positioning himself for Mr. Museveni's exit, so that they inherit Mr. Museveni's constituency, and then instead of having the son run for presidency because that's too overt, he becomes the running mate.
It's very unlikely. My view is it's very unlikely that Amama Mbabazi will be around to actually run as a top candidate in the next election. 5 years down the line,
why do you think that?
First his age, and then I think there's going to be a generational transition in Uganda in the next elections, where you're going to have a new crop of leaders. And if it's going to be one of the old, the NRA cadres, I don't think it's going to be a Mama Mbabazi, although he's a political ideologue. Most likely the guy who will come up is Ruhakama Rugunda, who has been, Museveni has been carrying him along all the time, taking him to the UN.
The current vice president.
And I think the succession line is along that, if not his son.
Okay. We'll come back to this. We have to take a short break now. You're watching Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV. We're discussing Uganda's election and the lessons Kenya can draw from elections within the wider East African region. Do share your thoughts with us. Our SMS number is 22422, and if you want to tweet, you can do so using the hashtag Cheche.